Hi there, folks. I'm Wayne Duvenage, and this is OUTA's weekly wrap on the 13th of February, 2026. And it's on these weekly wraps that we cover a range of pertinent lapses in public service accountability, corruption, and government decisions and policies that just lack rationality. And on occasion, we need to celebrate and talk about good outcomes and conduct where people in positions of power do the right thing. And I say on occasion because it doesn't happen a lot. But when it does happen, we need to talk about it. We need to celebrate it. But the real thing is we need to celebrate meaningful change, meaningful action that takes place and advances this country. So let's just jump straight into the obvious topic, and that is Thursday's State of the Nation address, abbreviated as SONA, to which our high-level reaction is one that, as an orator, the president gets a high score. And once again, as with his previous speeches, though, I do imagine that the president must be suffering from another SONA hangover this morning. I mean, he really does get so high on his own juice. His speechwriters are brewers of some amazing concocted imagination. And I seriously wonder if he believes the stuff that is written for him. Look, obviously, there are some good things that come out of it. And obviously the president, he capitalized on these. I mean, we are off the FATF grade list. The ratings agencies are looking a bit more favorably at South Africa. And the fact is that we should never have been in this situation before. We should never have got onto the grey list. We should never have been placed into junk status in these agency ratings in the first place. So yes, these are matters that we must celebrate, as is our lower interest rates, our stronger rand, and some uptick in our projected growth rate from 1%, 1.5%. I mean, these are trajectories that are moving in the right direction. But are they sustainable? I mean, are these outcomes based on what we've been able to achieve, or are they just consequential to international dynamics that are taking place at the moment? We are coming off a low base, though. Seriously, we should be punching at 3.5%, 4%, 5% growth rates. Our matric pass rate of 88%, yes, we must celebrate it, but it's based on a 30% pass rate, not a 40% pass rate. So it's easy to speak of improvements when your hurdles are low. We must begin to celebrate real achievements, not mediocrity. And so our president in the SONA speech spoke of many firefighting incidences that are going to be taking place. These are task teams and committees that are going to be looking into and dealing with our, fixing our broken systems, water systems, municipalities, government institutions that lack professionalism. We've heard of these before. We've seen the speech before, umpteen times. And what we need the president to be dealing with and seeing here is how do we prevent these crises from arising again? How do we put in lasting solutions? We cannot accept small shifts and improvement on a low basis being the benchmark of society's expectations of government success. And so while these indicators certainly give us hope, and they are a move in the right direction, our role as civil society is to continue to demand, push, and strive for our full potential to be reached as a nation, and sooner rather than later. And so what we heard in the President's SONA speech was, if you look at it and unpack it, more than 50 promises and commitments to addressing numerous challenges that our country is facing. And along with that, a plethora of plans, task teams, and committees to address them. I mean, the new National Water Crisis Committee is now going to be set up. It's going to report directly to the president to deal with our national growing water crisis. It is just getting out of hand. And it's not just in big cities like Joburg, it's across the country. And the problem is we don't have a shortage of plans. Our real issue is that we have a shortage of implementation, transparency, and accountability. Throughout the President's SONA speech, many commitments and promises were repeated from previous speeches. We've heard about tackling corruption, professionalizing the public sector, fixing procurement, reforming our state-owned entities, and building a capable state. But it's the implementation that is weak. and literally non-existent in many of those speech promises. The pattern remains the same for years. Year after year, a crisis is followed by a commission or a task team. Very little meaningful action takes place. The president said that organized crime is the biggest threat to our democracy. But OUTA's view is that organized crime thrives because corruption is enabled within government itself. Compromised officials, weak oversight, the abuse of procurement systems, and a lack of political will to act decisively. And I'll close on why that is in this talk and in this feedback. But the reality is that the ANC's cadre deployment program continues unabated, and that's what feeds it. You know that 2 months ago, OUTA filed papers to challenge a decision by Higher Education Minister Manamela to reinstate the CEO of the insurance seat, or NSETA as it's known, where he appointed Gugu Mkhize for another 5 years. He ignored the regulations, and he ignored the fact that NSETA had 4 repeated, poor, and qualified audits from the Auditor General, plus a host of other corruption and maladministration red flags that were popping up inside the SETA. He just went ahead and reappointed her for another 5 years, including a number of the board members who've sat on that board and overseen this rot for a number of years. They have failed to engage with civil society on the corruption allegations. They have failed to deal with the maladministration that took place. So are we surprised then that outside the venue of the SONA speech, we saw students protesting and calling on the minister to heed their calls about a lack of student accommodation? Now, why is that linked to this appointment of Gugu Mkhize? Well, it is. It is linked because there is a lack of oversight and meaningful accountability throughout the higher education department. So watch this video clip of the pressure that was placed on Manamela by these students.
There's no eviction at Ekaya, as per knowledge. There is transport that is available for students of CPUT who qualifies for funding and who qualifies for accommodation, who had been accommodated by CPUT, and that transport is available to take you to that place. So can we? Okay. Can we listen to each other? Can we listen to each other? Our objective is to make sure that none of you who are CPU students do sleep outside. We will make sure there's no issue. There's no issue with going with you now, getting with you into the bus to Ekaya. Let's do that now.
The reality is that student accommodation crisis has been building for years now, and OUTA has uncovered a corruption plan that was introduced within and by the powers of NSFAS a number of years ago. And that's what has led to this crisis. And we're in the final stages of compiling our report on this, and we'll present this to the minister and the presidency and NSFAS in the coming days. But, you know, we tried to warn this minister about this in the past. We have written on a number of occasions, and he has ignored us. So when the president speaks to us in his address and tells us of how they're going to address the student accommodation crisis by plans to build extra accommodation and so forth, in reality, much of this pressure could have been alleviated and averted just by addressing the student accommodation portal scam that we have uncovered and that was concocted inside NSFAS with the knowledge of people in high positions of power in government. So here we see again a knee-jerk reaction that will not solve the long-term problem. You know, back in 2018, the president promised in his SONA speech about state-owned entity cleanups and that integrity-driven board appointments would become the order of the day. What's going to change now that he's repeated this in his 2026 speech? I mean, why hasn't he taken some of his ministers to task when we have openly displayed how they have not done what they should have done, just in this regard? You know, Minister Manamela, again, had the opportunity to change these boards last year. Last year, 5-year tenure was over. These boards have overseen the failure of many of our seaters. He could have instituted new boards. You know what OUTA did when there was a call for nominations for chairpersons of SETAs? We hunted wide for good professional people to be nominated as a SETA chairperson. And we submitted those according to their plans and their requirements. And guess what? Not one of our nominations even received the courtesy of acknowledging their nomination and or even an interview. And we're not surprised. We heard in an interview that Bladen Zamanda had with the SABC that he interfered directly with this process. Watch this clip of how he says he interjected and made sure that OUTA's nominations didn't go any further and reach interview stage. Just watch this clip and tell us what you think about this gross abuse of power by somebody like Bladen Zamanda, who is a current minister in the president's cabinet.
But you've also been accused of corruption, particularly around the SETAs, saying the SETAs were used as an eating trough to fund the programs of the party and to fund those whom are cronies associated to you. What did you say to some of those people who raised that particular criticism of your influence within the SETAs at higher education?
I dismissed that, Samget. No case has been put against me about squandering money from the SETAs or whatever. OUTA doesn't say, by the way, they themselves, in case you didn't know, Samget, they submitted a long list of people they would like to serve from the SETAs. They themselves, because they've not been getting those people who they want. Some of them are apartheid-era entrepreneurs who used to actually just exploit the higher education sector. And I stood firm. I said, I am not going to allow these ones.
Sure. Talk about government interference. Talk about the abuse of power. I mean, this is a minister that's not even the Minister of Higher Education anymore. He's the Minister of Science and Technology and Innovation. Higher education was taken away from him, thankfully, because of the abuse that was taking place under his watch. And it really does just fly in the face of the president's call for professionalizing the public sector. So what do you think the president is going to do about this? If he ever gets to watch this or see that, he's going to do nothing. He's not going to fire Bladen Zamanda. He's not going to fire Buti Manamela for their roles in perpetuating the lack of professionalism in these critical institutions. So are we to believe the president when he says that they are going to go and do this good work or supposedly good work of professionalizing state entities? I doubt it. In 2019, we heard of the development of a smart city at Lanseria. It was lauded wide for weeks after the president's SONA speech then. 7 years later, that idea remains largely conceptual. The construction and conversion of an unused prison in Ekurhuleni to become a university was announced a number of years ago. Again, we hear of the president's plans to build universities and TVET colleges. But what has happened to that plan? Today, not a sod of soil has been turned. And one would argue that maybe this old prison shouldn't be turned into a university. Maybe it should be turned into an upgraded prison, maximum security prison, because we have a shortage of prison space and we should have a lot more people going into prisons. So maybe they should fix that prison and start getting it ready for a number of corrupt cadres who ought to be in orange overalls, quite frankly. The plan to fast-track the unbundling of Eskom to enable competitive trading and wheeling of electricity across an expanded grid was spoken of in SONA speeches as far back as 2019. There was a 2022 deadline. As far as we can see today, yet again in his speech, it was promised. It is a high priority, but it hasn't been implemented. And there's still discussions on how this is going to be done and a lot of pushback. In 2020, he promised that the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which had been compiled by the National Anti-Corruption Strategy Working Committee, would be rolled out within a year. And he did eventually receive the final recommendations from the council that was formed to finalize the strategy, to bed it down, and it was given to him in August last year. Nothing has happened. It's gathered dust for the last 6 months, only to be repeated again and commented on at SONA 2026. It's a good strategy, by the way. And he speaks of it in his SONA speech. It needs to be implemented. The question is when, and why hasn't the good work of that plan started to roll out already? On the subject of deploying the SANDF, the National Defence Force, to fighting crime in gangster-laden communities and illegal mining areas, well, this just signals urgency. And it really does highlight the failure to properly reform and capacitate the South African police services. I mean, military deployments are really a knee-jerk reaction. They cannot substitute fixing broken institutions. So, yes, it's a good idea to bring the army in as a short-term gap to try and get on top of the problems in our gangster-ridden communities and in these communities where illegal mining takes place. But where are the lasting solutions? And I'll tell you why it's so sad to hear this again, is because the army's presence to support the police at Stilfontein just over a year ago. You remember that? It was headline news for weeks. They starved the Zamazamas out of that Stilfontein mine. They smoked them out. And guess what? Those Zamazamas are still there in Stilfontein right now, continuing to illegally mine that same mine, despite millions of rands of that exercise that took place. You see the problem here? You see the problem. Nothing lasting has actually happened. I drove past that mine just 2 weeks ago in Stilfontein, and I was told by the local community that the Zamazamas continue unabated. Isn't that sad? I could go on. You know, the SONA speech really is a regurgitation of past promises, and unfortunately for President Ramaphosa, the citizens have lost faith. They don't believe what he says anymore. You know, we deserve more than recycled promises. Citizens deserve implementation. And that's why we just got to continue to hold government accountable for every commitment that is made in the SONA speech. And if you look at the commitments that were made in the past, they're not coming to fruition. So this morning, the country returns to our lived reality. Many parts of Joburg and many towns around the country have no running water. And Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi really put his foot in it when he explained that he had to resort to going to a hotel to take a shower. Now, it really does just display how removed from the reality and the plight that citizens face, and some arrogance to a certain degree of how he sees this problem. I mean, he has since apologized and tried to correct what he meant to say, but the damage has been done. And our Panyaza Lesufi really is removed from reality, as are many people in positions of high power in this. The current minister, Pemi Majidina of Water and Sanitation, recently cited that 400 billion rand will be required to repair South Africa's water infrastructure. Now, if you ask me, that number sounds like a thumbsuck. But even if it is that high, this is the cost and the suffering that we must endure. And we must watch as we see multiple firefighting knee-jerk reactions to dealing with the water crisis, when it is the result of years of neglect, deferred maintenance, and procurement manipulation and inefficiency. It is a case that we could have prevented had we had accountability in place, had we had all the promises that the President has spoken about in the past in place. And so it will continue. I want to move to another point. This week, OUTA raised some serious concerns about the R2 public-private partnership tender that was issued by the Road Traffic Infringement Agency, also known as RTIA. And our concerns here is that this is a procedural issue that smacks of irregularities. I mean, think of this. This is a very complex tender. It is very expensive, and it was issued during the Christmas holiday period, just before everybody went on leave, and the compulsory briefing that tenderers had to attend to happened shortly after people started to come back to work in the middle of January, shortly after the end of the holiday period. So these timelines have been compressed, and yes, while the deadline for filing the tenders has moved slightly out by a week or two, it is not enough. It is certainly not enough for this. But the bigger problem is that this is a complex public-private partnership. And we have a serious problem when private partnerships are done with government based on issues that are going to make profits on enforcement of traffic fine management. There's a serious problem here because, and it is spoken about at provincial level, that this should not be happening. And yet it appears to be going ahead with and going down this road. Really, this is an issue of public of procurement integrity that is raising too many questions. We need intervention here. We've asked the minister to get back to us on this. There are far too many red flags. We see these red flags in many similar types of tenders, and we've got to be sure that we don't open a can of worms and many unintended consequences that come from public-private partnerships of this nature. But more worryingly is that this system and this process is one that can be managed and can be handled by the Road Traffic Management Corporation and their latest platform, which is geared for the provision of this of an infrastructure and a platform to manage traffic fine data and processes on behalf of the RTIA. And yet the RTIA chooses not to use the RTMC. You have to ask yourself, what is the real agenda here? So we've written to the minister to seek feedback and answers on this issue. A few weeks have passed. We've had no response. And then again, we see this conduct. It just flies in the face of what the SONA's present speeches have been saying, repeatedly encouraging ministers, encouraging government departments to work with civil society to help and find solutions to the many and gross inefficiency and corruption that pervades the public sector. And once again, this is just talk is cheap, The public will suffer the consequences if this system goes ahead unchallenged or with a lack of clarity and the lack of transparency that is required here. So let's see what happens, and we'll keep you posted on that. But if government is serious about reform and procurement discipline, then the rhetoric just needs to be replaced by real and meaningful action. At the same time, institutional fragility continues elsewhere. The business rescue practitioners have all but given up on trying to fix the South African Post Office. It is literally dysfunctional now. I mean, how's it possible that government has allowed the post office? Well, this is an institution that fulfills an important social mandate to the people. How's it possible for them to allow it to collapse like that? Another state entity in dire straits is that of the SABC, which also fulfills an important social mandate to provide news, current affairs, and education to many communities across the country, not only on television, but on radio. So when these institutions fail, it is often, and most often, the poor and the isolated communities that bear the brunt and the pain. One imagines that by fixing governance and modernizing digitizing systems will help. I mean, the president spoke of this again in his SONA speech this week, and he's been speaking about this for a long time. It does help. But how does it play out in disconnected rural communities? I mean, public confidence is rebuilt by professionalizing the public sector. Of course it is. But this is a topic that we just cannot continue to hear speeches on. We need to see real meaningful action this time. And so hopefully we're going to see timelines to some of these plans that the president has spoken of, so that we can start assessing how it is happening, when it is happening, why is it taking so long. We need to see more stringent vetting of people that are finding their way into positions of power in the public sector. We've spoken about this before. We've spoken about lifestyle audit. We don't see it happening. We just don't see it happening. And so the proceedings of the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry continue to expose what is actually happening when there is structural strain within policing and municipal governance. So This week, again, we see the Commission of Inquiry on the capture of the policing systems, continues to expose the structural strain of policing and municipal governance. What we did see this week was acting IPID head Thuso Kifelakai outlining the difficulty of investigating crimes against the police officers while relying on the same people, SAPs, to execute parts of the mandate. Kemi Bahari conceded that previous statements made to the Commission were false, including claiming to send a correspondence to IPID regarding the suspension of EMPD. This is the Ekurhuleni Metro Police Department's acting chief, Julius Mkhwanazi. So, lying under oath. I mean, this is a serious matter. Are there going to be consequences? We'll have to wait and see. I mean, most worrying developments and allegations from commissions, this commission's work, suggest that there are elements within the policing structures that have become criminal conduits for information and activity for organized crime revenue stream. The picture emerging from the Commission's work is a wild and vivid display of a serious breakdown in our police service. We all know that now. And thank goodness for Mkhwanazi's initial revelation in July last year, which sparked this inquiry, because without it, the president would never have begun to take the corrective actions, the kind of which the public have been shouting about for years now. He wouldn't have listened to us, but he has to listen to this commission. And so finally, we have a president that is setting up another task team, requesting a plan to be devised to fix the structures and the rot within our police service. Oh boy. I mean, we need the results and the outcomes of this plan to be implemented quickly. We need, not just throwing money at it in a knee-jerk reaction, we need a sustained solution to this problem. We really do. We need a sustained solution to whistleblower protection. And OUTA has repeatedly called for stronger whistleblower protection frameworks. And there is a good one within that, within the National Anti-Corruption Strategy that has been outlined for the president. It should be implemented. It should have been implemented long ago. So without credible protection and accountability, this work of whistleblowers is high risk. Parliament's ad hoc committee heard 2 days of testimony from Paul O'Sullivan this week. Parliament's committee really should exist to interrogate evidence, to test credibility, pursue public interest outcomes. And to be effective, the authority rests on being serious, to be disciplined, rather than going through what we saw was rather concerning, questioning that shifted away from evidence-based work to attacks on personality and exchanges that became adversarial. These became spectacles rather than seeking clarity of what the issues were at hand. So when the focus moves away from a purpose that seeks institutional reform towards one of individual confrontation and theatre, one has to question the purpose and the impact of the ad hoc committee. There's a visible contrast between what is happening at that ad hoc committee and what is happening in the very disciplined process of the Madlanga Commission. The tone at the Madlanga Commission is one that sets the scene where witnesses are examined methodically. Evidence is introduced, it is tested, it is contextualized, and the conclusions are not rushed. Parliament needs to hold itself to some standard. Public confidence in parliamentary oversight is already fragile. And so many South Africans are just questioning whether these committees produce the consequences or whether they just produce headlines. And that perception just deepens when the proceedings appear reactive, emotional, based on political expediency. At the same time, whistleblowers and investigators and civil society should be addressed on the quality of the evidence they bring, not on their personality, not on their past history or political alignment. It would be remiss of me not to talk about the testimony raised by Brigadier Rachel Macheng, a high-ranking police officer who last week said that she received gifts from Vusumuzi Katmaklala, not because they were gifts from a corruption point of view, but they were presented to her out of acts of love, romance, and a relationship with Vusimusi, Kat Matlala. I mean, really, what she's trying to tell us is this is not bribery. These were exchanges motivated by passion. And then we're supposed to believe her, but we're not presented with any pictures or any text messages to provide evidence of such a relationship. Really, seriously, Ms. Macheng, you must think this commission or the public are a bunch of fools when you go down those roads. You, dear lady, probably the biggest fool in this. You need to spend time in jail, quite frankly. This is just unacceptable. You waste our time when you present to a commission in the manner that you have. And let's just reflect, globally we've seen renewed attention on the Epstein files, and this has reignited this whole debate that we have here in South Africa. It's about power and consequence. While these issues play out within a distant and different legal system, the same principles apply. A lack of accountability and the abuse of power are core features when compared to the sagas that unfold there and are unfolding here. This week, we saw the launch or the release of the Global Corruption Perception Index from Transparency International. And again, it places South Africa in a position we're not surprised of. 41 was our score out of 100. Your countries like Denmark and Finland and Singapore, they score high in the 80s. Those are countries that their population, their people are very satisfied with how the government manages and runs their country from a corruption point of view. Corruption is extremely low in those countries. They have good corruption perception indexes. Here we are floundering at a score of 41. Other countries in Africa like Botswana, Namibia, and Ghana, and others score much better than us. So we're not surprised. And a score of 41, by the way, doesn't describe a country that is winning in the fight against corruption. It describes a country that is stuck in the middle of it. It reflects weak procurement controls, inconsistent enforcement, delayed consequences, political interference, institutional fatigue, and it really does explain why our systems are failing, why we have collapsed utility, why our metros are failing, our municipalities are failing, why our public broadcasters struggle to fund election, why whistleblowers remain exposed, why commissions must do their work. Internal governance is not being resolved. So this is a score that is not theatrical, because we see it every day in our taps running dry and our roads crumbling and raw sewage pouring down our roads into our river system, and our criminal justice system just failing to round up the problem people that cause this misery in our lives. It explains clearly why organizations like OUTA and others continue to demand that oversight must be exercised before our systems collapse, and that whistleblowers require meaningful protection, and that reform must be structural and long-lasting and entrenched for continuity. I think as a nation, we have collectively woken up to the euphoria of another great SONA speech, but not a great SONA speech that gives us the confidence of introducing the solutions. The ambitions and the plans are there. We just don't believe our current government can execute them. Only because of one thing. They haven't executed these plans, these same ideas spoken repeatedly of in the past. And that's all because there is a lack of political will to do so. And why is that? What's the underlying cause of that lack of political will? It's because our political structures are compromised. Too many people in positions of power are linked to the problems that we have. They are linked to the networks. They have interests to ensure that our criminal justice system doesn't function effectively or as effectively as it should. That's the real problem. And so they will continue to look away. There will be lack of oversight, lack of boards that hold people to account. They will continue to ensure that people are weak. Weak people are put into positions of power. So we cannot professionalize the the public sector, as is promised. We cannot do so under these circumstances. And unless we address that, which the president and his party and his cadres linked to the ANC are still in positions of power, it's going to be extremely difficult. So the president will say a lot, but he will not be able to do a lot while this situation exists. That's it for this week. Until next time, stay safe and have fun.